Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. It's the post-game pod from the Wolves loss to the Kings. No defense early, no offense late. Stop me if you've heard that one before in regards to the Wolves. We're going to break the whole thing down next. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is not a victory Tuesday, a really disappointing loss for the Wolves on Monday night against the Kings. In the wake of the De'Aaron Fox trade, of course, no Zach LaVine available yet for Sacramento, so a decidedly shorthanded Kings team that the Wolves had beaten twice on the road already this year, lost to once at home. There will be no tiebreaker advantage as the season series is now over and tied at 2, and the Wolves turned what was a promising 5-game winning streak with winnable games on the horizon into a now 2-game losing streak against the NBA's worst team in the Wizards on Saturday and a team that just traded their best player in the Sacramento Kings on Monday. We're going to break down everything that happened in this one. There's a lot to get to. The Wolves couldn't play defense early. They couldn't score late. Anthony Edwards had an off night, his return from an illness. So lots to unpack. We'll do all that in just a moment. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the email newsletter, the Locked On Wolves newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox Monday through Friday. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. All right. So the Kings traded De'Aaron Fox over the weekend. I guess that trade went through on Sunday. It's all kind of a blur post Luka Doncic trade on Saturday, which we covered the Wolves angle of that, at least from a Western Conference standpoint on yesterday's show, Monday's show. So the De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine trade goes through. I actually don't hate it for the Kings, grand scheme of things. Like, I get it. LaVine DeRozan jokes, very funny. I actually like LaVine and Sabonis together, and like, I'm not at all saying Zach LaVine's better than De'Aaron Fox. I don't want to go too far down this path, but I actually don't hate the trade for the Kings. I think De'Aaron Fox has been a little bit overrated. I think his clutch performance, which can always be a little bit fluky, kind of peaked 2 years ago when the Kings were, lighting the beam and the whole thing. Don't tell Matt George at Locked On Kings I said all this, but I think that I don't know. I'm not saying they're better, but they could definitely have done worse in that trade, I think. I know they didn't get a ton of picks. The Spurs didn't give up as much as people thought they would have, but I think the Kings turned out okay from that one. Anyway, all that to say, the Wolves were still, I think, 3.5-point favorites on FanDuel headed into this game. Anthony Edwards didn't play Saturday due to illness. He was questionable, but was at shoot-around and stayed after to shoot on Monday. So it did seem like he was going to play, and he did. Now, as Reid played after playing just 20 minutes and exiting early on Saturday against Washington with the sprained finger. Of course, no Julius Randle, no Dante DiVincenzo, but otherwise the team was healthy. Conley had missed a game last week. He played. Ant missed Saturday. He played. Nas had been injured, and he played. Now, early in the game, neither team could miss. And the first couple of minutes, the defense was a little bit loosey-goosey for both teams. I thought it tightened up as the quarter went on, and both teams just kept making tough shots. Like, legitimately, like, I didn't really have a major problem with, well, let me rephrase that. In the very early stage of the first quarter, like I said, it was loosey-goosey on both ends. And the Wolves, like, they were scoring enough. If they just buckled down a little bit defensively and showed some intensity, it was really when the bench unit came in. We saw some really solid defensive possessions from Minnesota. Jalen Clark, Luka Garza was out there defending his rear end off. Nikhil always, Rob Dillingham actually defensively really impressed me in this game. I thought he was really getting into guys and getting through screens as best he can and bodying up guys. There were a couple possessions where he just, like, really impressive verticality. There was a couple plays he had against Keon Ellis where Ellis thought there were fouls on Dillingham, but it was just good defense. There were at least one of those was in the third quarter, but overall, I thought the Wolves defense bench unit, came in and defended extremely well. The Wolves were still down 4 at the end of the first quarter. Sacramento scored 38 in the first quarter, but the Wolves had 34. And the ball movement for Minnesota was actually really good. Ant had a couple of hockey assists that looked really nice, that were effective. Gobert was getting dunks. Mike Conley was moving the basketball really well. He finished with 9 assists and no turnovers in this game. And early on, the offense was humming. The defense wasn't good enough. As the game wore on, though, the defense tightened up. The bench unit was kind of the first group that did that for Minnesota. And then in the third quarter, I thought they defended really well. Like Rudy was locking down the paint, couple blocks that started transitioning the other way. Ant had a nice block. I think that was second quarter. But the defense showed up as the game wore on for Minnesota. The problem was DeMar DeRozan couldn't miss. And I'm going to say that, like, grand scheme of things, this was more about DeMar DeRozan than it was about the Wolves defense outside of the first few minutes of the game. First half of the first quarter, we'll say. And then some stretches in the fourth quarter. But again, it was more about DeRozan than it actually was the Wolves defense. He shot 14 of 25 in this game. I don't know how the box score says he missed 11 shots. I do not remember DeMar DeRozan missing 11 shots. He's always been a Wolves killer. Remember, he had 40 plus for that bad Bulls team a couple of years ago when the Wolves, I think that was 2 years ago, when the Wolves lost twice to the Bulls and he killed them, I think, both games. He had 33 and 7 with 0 turnovers in this game. 33 points on 25 shots, only shot 4 threes and made 2 of them. Only got to the line 4 times because the dude was just shooting like 18 footers the whole game and making virtually all of them. Early, Rudy Gobert was dropping. They were really worried about Domantas Sabonis getting behind him. Sabonis was quiet. I think he had 1 bucket in the first half. He finished just 14 points on 15 shots, but Rudy was so afraid of Sabonis rolling and sneaking behind him. He was playing a deep drop, which is a tough thing to do against DeRozan. And, it would have been a tough thing to do against, De'Aaron Fox, I guess, is more wanting to get to the rim than he is shooting in the mid-range, but like, he's still a decent mid-range jump shooter. A deep drop against DeRozan is just a really tough thing to do. And the Wolves did that. Eventually, Rudy started to step up. He had 1 nice block when he did that. I thought they made things a little bit more difficult on the Kings. And also Malik Monk's another one. Like, he's more willing to diversify his shot profile than DeMar DeRozan is, but he also is happy to shoot from the mid-range and can hurt you if you let him do it. And so eventually Rudy started to play up a little bit more. And that helped, but then the Kings made some tough threes. Like Keon Ellis was 3 for 3 outside the arc. The Kings as a team shot 42% from outside the arc. They only attempted 24 threes, which is a pretty low number for an NBA team in 2025. But they drained 42% of their threes. And it was really a pick your poison. It wasn't quite to the level of like on Saturday when the Wizards couldn't miss. But this was a shooting display by a team that desperately needed or wanted needed a win in the wake of the De'Aaron Fox trade. And I really only blame that early kind of the Wolves defensive effort to start the game. And then as the game wore on, I thought they maybe took a little bit too long to be in a less of a deep drop, not so deep of a drop for Rudy, and to play up closer to the level to at least there were a couple of possessions where he almost kind of stunted, where he was kind of at the level and then recovered, and Jaden or whoever was guarding the ball did recover to the ball. And I thought that worked pretty well, but you just can't mess up. If you give DeRozan a sliver, he's going to score. I do want to talk about the other end of the floor because, again, the Kings shot the lights out. And other than the slow start and some slow adjustments mid-game, I thought the Wolves' effort, especially the backcourt, I thought Jaden was actually pretty good defensively in this game. I thought that I already talked about Dillingham and Nikhil, and Jalen Clark was great. But I want to talk about offense because that's where, and I know you look up and the Wolves had 114 and you wouldn't think that was the issue, but it was. I mean, that's what stagnated for Minnesota in the I would say the fourth quarter when this was a close ball game, is Sacramento they weren't getting wide open looks. They were making tough looks. Minnesota was either not getting shots off, or when they did, they were not making tough looks like Sacramento was. It just came down to shot making, which sounds like a shrug of the shoulders and like, I don't know, they just made shots. But that's what happened. But I want to talk about why the Kings at least got DeRozan those looks, and Anthony Edwards didn't get those looks. I mean, that was really the difference. Is the Kings got their best player those opportunities? The Wolves failed to do that for Anthony Edwards. So I want to talk about that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags we should avoid, but what if we focused more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships, those green flags? If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself, because aren't we all, or at least we all should be, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy can help you develop healthy boundaries and improve your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. Therapy provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you could do so at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. So DeMar DeRozan squeezed the trigger in this game 25 times, and Ant ended up getting up 21 shots. But a couple of those were, he was effective early getting into the paint. Actually thought he was pretty aggressive getting downhill. He deserved more than 4 free throw attempts. But in the fourth quarter, Anthony Edwards could not get a shot off. And if he did, there was no space to do it. Like, I'm looking at the shot chart. Anthony Edwards attempted 2 shots from the field in the fourth quarter. DeMar DeRozan attempted 7 shots from the field in the fourth quarter. What's the difference? Well, teams play Anthony Edwards a lot more aggressively. Teams put 2 on the ball against Anthony Edwards. And we've talked about this before. It's a pretty narrow range of players that teams actually put 2 on the ball for. Like, it's not a common thing. It's Luka. It's guys like that. And it's Ant. Ant started getting that respect probably the tail end of 2 seasons ago and on and off last year. And we've seen it a lot of the time this year because, first of all, Ant has to prove he can get off the ball. He can make the right choice when the ball's in his hands. He can react quickly to a double team. And, sometimes he tries to split the double team. His handle's not super tight sometimes. And we saw that in this game too. And also, the Wolves have a limited number of guys that can hurt you other than Anthony Edwards, as we saw Saturday with no Ant and no DiVincenzo and no Julius Randle and only a half game of Naz Reid. There's nobody else on this team besides Rob Dillingham that has the ability to consistently get their own shot. We haven't seen Dillingham do that consistently yet. He doesn't have a body of work at the NBA level, but in terms of guys that scare you as the opponent, nobody else can hurt you. But it starts with Ant making the right decision. So the Kings are sending 2. They actually did this to Dillingham a little bit in the game too, because the Wolves as a whole don't move very well without the ball, and at least not consistently. And they don't usually have a good plan for when teams send 2 at the ball, which is a crazy thing, because like we see that happen all the time with Anthony Edwards. And sure enough, in this game, the Kings did it early, but Ant made quick decisions. I mean, there were a couple possessions in the first half. There was the one that he made a perfect pass to Rudy. Rudy got a dunk blocked, and I think it was a good no call. He got the ball back and then was clobbered. They didn't call a foul, and then ultimately the ball goes the other way. Timeout. Rudy yells at the ref. That was a great pass by Ant. There was another one that was like that. And then there was at least one, maybe 2 hockey assists early. Like early in the game, Ant was making quick reactive decisions. He was getting off the ball early, the whole thing. The game wore on, and the Kings became more aggressive in how they were blitzing the ball. And Ant, I think, got frustrated. He clearly got frustrated. And he wasn't willing to just give the ball up. He wasn't reacting quick enough. And nobody else on the Wolves could hurt them off the dribble. Naz did a little bit. He at least, made that effort. Same with Jaden McDaniels. Naz certainly can. He has the ability. And early in the game, we haven't even talked about it because the way the game finished, Naz finished 30 points. And he made his first 4 shots. He was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 early, finished with 30 points at 19 shots. Was really, really good. But Naz and Jaden were the only other guys that attempted more than 9 shots on the team for Minnesota. And Jaden was actually relatively efficient. Like, they were okay, but the Kings weren't worried about it. They were basically saying, hey, if Jaden's going to beat us on a weird little leaner from 10 feet, fine. If Naz Reid's going to beat us going downhill at the basket, fine. And credit the Kings, they did a pretty good job of defending Naz's drives. They knocked the ball out of his hands a couple of times. They knew the Wolves were frustrated with the lack of foul calls. They knew Mike Conley wasn't going to hurt him off the dribble. He finally, he had a wide open layup with like a minute and a half left because the seas parted. No one was expecting Conley to actually keep his dribble all the way to the rim, and he did, and he made a layup. And then he hit that big 3 late that actually made it close. But Mike Conley's not a threat in the half court. Like, teams are not worried about Mike Conley in the half court. I have the same criticism today for Chris Finch as I did after Saturday's loss to the Wizards, and that is going back to Rob Dillingham down the stretch. I do not care that he's a rookie. I do not care that he struggles defensively at times, especially given the effort he put forth defensively early in this game. You need that secondary shot creation, or at least the threat of it on the floor next to Anthony Edwards, if you're going to score down the stretch in these games. If you're going to hold serve, I mean, they weren't stopping the Kings anyway. Like it's not like Mike Conley was out here shutting anybody down. So and I get that the Kings would try and hunt Rob Dillingham. I understand that. But at least you're going to hold, like, they didn't stop them as it was. And you have a much better shot at scoring on your end of the floor if you have Rob Dillingham and what he's able to do offensively on the floor versus, the aging Mike Conley, we'll call him. A shell of the Mike Conley we've seen in past seasons. That was my criticism. My big criticism of Chris Finch down the stretch. Rob Dillingham only played 14 minutes in this game, and I thought he was good. And I know he missed all 3 of his threes. I think he missed both of his threes on Saturday, or maybe all 3 of his threes Saturday too. One of them, by the way, Dillingham and Jalen Clark each had a 3-pointer that was 3/4 of the way down. Like, I swear the one from Jalen Clark in the first half was like in the net and literally spun up and out. That one might have been the craziest one. Dillingham's felt like it was half down and popped out in the, I think, 4th quarter. But Dillingham deserved to be on the floor late. I thought it would have made a lot more sense to go with Dillingham instead of Conley. At this stage, I understand you could trust Conley to do the right thing defensively, but can you trust him to be able to execute it with consistency down the stretch? And if he's a complete non-factor offensively, then you have to consider doing something different. And I made this point maybe a week ago when Dillingham was starting to kind of play much better in the midst of that winning streak, was Dillingham and Ant together are so good because teams can't load up on Ant in the same way with Dillingham on the floor as they can without Dillingham on the floor. And we've seen enough now of Rob Dillingham, and I don't want this to get twisted or anything. I'm not saying Rob Dillingham is like an all-star or is the solution to all of the problems. I'm saying in this game, down the stretch, what ended up being a 1-possession game, when you struggled to score in the 4th quarter and your best player had only 2 shot attempts and their best player had 7 shot attempts in the 4th quarter, what are some things you could do differently? The only guy that's dangerous enough to score off the dribble besides Naz Reid and Anthony Edwards on this team is Rob Dillingham, with Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo out. So he's got to be on the floor down the stretch. And this is something I'll probably talk more about this on tomorrow's show. I want to talk more about Dillingham. And I do have a bit of a soapbox to get on, by the way, which I'll tease this for tomorrow. But just because I'm saying Rob's the solution now doesn't mean I disagree with them waiting so long to play him more. And I think there's maybe a middle ground there, because the short version, the super short version, because I can't help myself, is that Rob Dillingham 4 months ago, is not the same guy that he is now. Like, fans are not seeing him every day in practice. They're not seeing the inner workings, the film sessions, etc. Like, was he as ready to play on October 15th as he is on February 3rd? I don't know. We don't know. We have to trust that the coaching staff we know they have more visibility into this than we do. So there has to be, like, the player that Rob Dillingham is now still is flawed, but we don't know that he would have been the same player months ago. We just don't. We can't discount that there was any sort of development, and also him watching from the bench and all that stuff along the way, feeds into this. All that to say, in this particular game, Rob Dillingham deserved to play more than 14 minutes. He deserved to be on the floor in a one-possession game late when the Wolves were struggling to execute offensively, struggling to allow Ant to have the space to operate. Having somebody else who's a real jump shot threat from the perimeter and can actually put the ball on the floor and beat guys off the dribble and is a plus passer would have trumped the I guess the concern of him being hunted defensively. That's my biggest thing. All right, I want to close with studs and duds, and we'll peek ahead and see what's next for the Wolves. We'll do all that here to close the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here this Sunday. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, which you better believe I love to do. Not as much the coin toss, but some of the other prop bets. FanDuel will make it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field. That's one of my favorite things. The prop bets before the game, the live betting during the game, depending on the game gets. I feel like I have a pretty good pulse usually on like game flow and what, especially these teams that we've watched all season long. I think the line's still 1.5 in favor of the Chiefs. The live betting to me is a ton of fun because if you feel like you have a pulse on the game, you feel for supposed momentum, you can definitely find ways to win there. Plus, knowing that you could place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that is the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right. Let's do studs and duds. Naz Reid's an absolute stud in this game. He was the offense that kept the Wolves in it early. He finished with 30 points, which I believe is a season high for him, on 12 of 19 shooting. He was 5 of 9 outside the arc, made his first 3 threes, 5 boards, 3 assists, 2 blocks, and 0 turnovers for Naz Reid. In fact, he was one of only 2 Wolves players that had a positive plus-minus. By the way, I was floored when I saw that Mike Conley was the other one. And he did have 9 assists and no turnovers. I'm talking about Conley now. But, and he is the best plus-minus. Rob Dillingham had the worst plus-minus. My eyes, I just did that whole, that whole thing in the last segment about how I would have had Dillingham on the floor late. I still mean that. I don't care what the plus-minus says. Single game plus-minus is not intended to be used that way where you say, oh, well, obviously you should have stuck with Conley. Dillingham played better in this game. And a lot of those assists, a lot of that play came early in the game from Mike Conley. The ball movement, the ball was snapping around, it was great. But when the Kings really loaded up on Ant, it was Conley was so much less effective than Rob Dillingham, and I don't care about the plus minus in that regard. I don't want to get off back on that. Talk about it tomorrow. Naz Reid, 12 of 19 shooting, 30 points, and I have his game log pulled up. I believe that is his season high. He did have 29 just a couple of weeks ago in the loss to Memphis, and he had 28 back in November against Portland. So yeah, 30 is his season high, barely, but it is his season high. So really good game from Naz, and of course they needed that offensive production. He's so much more efficient than when he gets rolling like this. He's more efficient than the baseline Julius Randle, and obviously a very different player. But to get that out of that second big spot was really important. Rudy Gobert gets a stud for me. I thought he played extremely well. He had 13 rebounds, 7 offensive rebounds in this game for Rudy Gobert. Now, the Kings also had 11 offensive rebounds. Domantas Sabonis had 5 of his own. He's a great rebounder. That was a fun battle watching those guys go after it. 2 of the guys that complained to the officials the most in the NBA, which is saying a lot, but it was still fun to watch them play. 19 points on 8 of 9 for Rudy. 13 boards, 2 blocks. He also had 3 assists and a steal and no turnovers. The Wolves as a team only had 8 turnovers in this game, which surprised me. But, we just had a lot of good shot making from both teams. So 19 and 13 for Rudy, 35, 3 and 2 for Naz Reid. And then my third stud in this game, I don't really have one. I guess it would have to be Jaden McDaniels. He had 22 points. on 8 of 17. He was more efficient than Anthony Edwards, 2 of 7 on threes, 4 of 4 at the line, 7 rebounds for Jaden, which is so nice to see. 3 blocks, a steal. He also had 3 turnovers, including the fatal turnover when they were down 3 with 6.4 seconds left or whatever it was. And Ingles, we should talk about that last play, by the way. Ingles was the inbounder. I watched it back like 5 times. There wasn't anybody open, except right when he turned to throw it to Jaden, the ref had just finished his 4th count. Like he was at like 4.5 seconds. If he had turned back to his left, Ant was breaking open, and he would have let go of the pass before 5 seconds. It would have taken a quarter second longer to turn and throw it to Ant versus throwing it to Jaden. Instead, he throws it to Jaden. I think it was deflected by who was it in the corner? Was it Malik Monk? I think it was. Off of Jaden's hand, out of bounds. It was the right call. It was just too bad. A pretty anticlimactic way for a game to end instead of a fun buzzer beating attempt. But if Ingles had looked back to his left, Ant would have broken open. Before that, nobody was open. I felt like Ant probably could have been a little bit more urgent with his cut when he flared out to the left wing to try and get open. When he came back to the ball is when he popped open, and he would have had to work to get a good shot, but he would have had 6 seconds to do it or whatever it was. So that was disappointing. But still, Jaden was probably the Wolves' 3rd best player in this game. Duds, I'm not going to give Ant a dud. He was active. He played hard. He looked really just completely out of breath at the end of the 3rd quarter. He looked like Mavericks conference finals version of Anthony Edwards, honestly. And I'm sure the illness, whatever he had, he missed the game Saturday. I'm sure he's not at 100%. He looked like he was playing really hard in this. Like, I'm not at all questioning effort. I'm not questioning I'm not Nico Harrison. I'm not questioning his conditioning or anything like that. He just looked at like he wasn't normal Anthony Edwards. So he's not a dud in this game. I don't know. Nikhil and Luka Garza, I'm going to give them each a half dud. Luka only played 5 minutes in the first half, did not come back in the second. It was just like what we saw. He was so good on Thursday and the Wolves win. Saturday, he was brutal. He was bad again on Monday. Luka was 1 for 5 shooting, 0 for 2 outside the arc, only had 1 rebound in 5 minutes, did have a steal, played some good defense. He's just got to make shots. Like that's half of the battle when he's on the floor. He's got to make open shots, and he didn't. Nikhil, the Wolves need more out of him. I think he's just been in like, I'm going to jack up a 3 mode wherever I am on the floor. Is kind of what this feels like for Nikhil Alexander-Walker. He had 2 points on 1 of 5, was 0 for 3 on threes, had 2 assists, committed 3 fouls. He's also like, for the last 2 weeks, I feel like every time he commits a foul, he acts like the world's ending and he didn't touch anybody ever. And I love Nikhil, but that's been like at an 11 recently. And like, just chill, man. Just not every call is the worst call ever. But I'd still rather Nikhil be, give that effort and be aggressive than not. So whatever, but he's got to give you something offensively, especially with no DiVincenzo, and also with no Julius Randle. And he didn't in this game, and that hurt. We talked a little about Jalen Clark. He certainly looked the part. Shocking that he had no rebounds in 18 minutes. That's one of his things, is he's a good rebounder for a guard. We didn't see that. By the way, Clark and Dillingham combined for 0 rebounds in a combined 32 minutes of play. Not great. In fact, the entire Timberwolves bench had 2 rebounds in this game, 1 defensive rebound. The entire Timberwolves bench, which is a collective 60 minutes. 60 minutes of bench play and 2 rebounds for the Timberwolves in this game. They were a minus 11 on the glass. They allowed 11 offensive rebounds for Sacramento. So that's disappointing, to say the least. On the plus side, only 8 turnovers. Perfect 16 of 16 at the line. I thought they could have gotten to the line more often. The officiating wasn't super great in this game. The 3-point shooting, outside of Nas and Ant, nobody could hit the broadside of the barn from deep. They were 30% on threes, which is obviously an issue. I talked about the Kings. It felt like they were making everything. The Wolves had good looks in the first half. I talked about the ball movement in the first quarter being so good. They just missed those shots. And in the fourth quarter, they didn't get those shots because of all the things we already talked about with the Kings loading up on Anthony Edwards. All right. That's all for this one. Perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about that on Wednesday's show. We will talk a little bit more about Rob Dillingham on Wednesday's show, because I think he's going to be key to unlocking some of this offense moving forward. Wolves Bulls Wednesday, once again, very winnable game. And then it gets tougher. You get the back-to-back with Houston on Thursday, and then Portland, who the Wolves are 1-2 against on Saturday. This homestand that should have been a 4-1 homestand at worst, they're going to have a real tough time winning 3 in a row here. But they gotta do it, because then you go at Cleveland, home for Milwaukee, home for OKC, all before the All-Star break. Not great. You got to win these next 3. You just do. Get to that would get them to 7 above 500 at 30-23 before going at Cleveland on Monday. It's that Houston game is going to be the tough one, obviously. Well, I say that. They just lost to Washington and Sacramento, so who knows? All right, that's all I got for you today. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll talk Rob Dillingham. We'll preview the Bulls matchup and more on Wednesday's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow an X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder, you can subscribe to the daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. One-stop shop for all things Wolves and NBA at LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.